Okay, so yeah, we have looked at, how to store data with variables. We've looked at how to control the flow of our app with conditionals and logic. So let's look at the next another thing that we do a lot in code, and that's looping, repeating things over and over. So let's get into it. One of the most basic loops that you'll see, and honestly, it's not really used that often, but I think it's good to go over, is the for loop. Now, let's say in JavaScript, we want to count up to 10. We could use a for loop for that. So let's look at what a for loop is. And here's the basic syntax of the for loop. We have a for. We have 3 statements in here, kind of separated by semicolons. And then in there is a block of code that's going to be executed a certain amount of times. So statement 1, this first one, is executed one time before the execution of this loop. Now, statement 2 defines the condition for executing the code block. So as long as statement 2 is true, we're going to continue to loop. And statement 3 is executed every time after this block has been executed. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at a real example. So like I said, let's say we want to count from 1 to 10. Actually, let's start at 0 for fun. So let's start at 0. So I'm going to declare a variable right here as the first statement. And then that second statement, remember, is the condition. So as long as I is less than or equal to 10, let's run this loop. And then the third statement is going to be executed after every time. So let's do an I++. So what's this I++? That's just going to take I and add 1 to it. Console.log I. So let's go ahead. Now I can run this node 3-loops. So we start at 0 and we count all the way up to 10. I could count more by 10. I could say I plus equals 2. That's going to count by 2s. So I could count, I could even say, if I wanted to count backwards. So what I could do if I wanted to count backwards, well, I'll just set my variable to start at 10. And then the condition, as long as I is less than, as long as, I is greater or equal to 0, I can subtract I1 from I with the I minus. And so that can give me a way to count down from 10. So we can kind of see with these for loops, we can count up to 10, we can count then to 10, or any number we can count by, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's just a way we can do things a certain amount of time. Cool. So let's look at let's look at the alternative, because what you might see for loops work with a lot, and we haven't really talked about arrays, but let's get our first taste of arrays in JavaScript. I'm going to come here and we count them backwards. So let's do a for loop on arrays. So here's how I declare an array. So you can think of an array as just a list of whatever kind of data type. So let's just do an array of numbers. So I have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And just to do a quick, I'm going to next do a video on arrays, but let's just do a quick little demo on what an array is. So like I said, I can come in here, create a variable. Let's just call it X. So how I declare an array is just with these square brackets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do characters. I'm going to do strings, some A, B, C, D. So you can think of this just as a list of things. So now I have X, which is in an array. So if I want to grab one of these values, what I can do is I can index it. Now arrays start at indexing at position 0. So if I want to grab the first thing, I don't say 1, I actually say 0. So if I want to grab the last thing, it's going to be the length of this array minus 1, which would be 3. Now, what is very, very common is we loop over arrays. Like we can say we have a list of something, we want to loop over it. So let's do that with a for loop. So with the for loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare this I variable, set it equal to 0. Now, the reason I'm setting it at 0 is because that's how I grab the first thing. Because what I want to do is I want to grab, x at 0, then I want to grab x at 1, x at 2, x at 3. So it's kind of like our example of counting up to a certain amount of things. So what I want to do is I want to go as long as I is less than my array.length. So arrays have this dot length property on them. I could show this down here, x.length. That gives me the length of the array. So I want to count up, so I is less than this length, but remember, since we start at 0, actually I want to subtract 1 from that. Because if I have an array of, 4 things, I want to count from 0 to 3. And then I can do an I++. And I can just do a console.log array at I. Because this I variable is the number, like we saw when we're counting up to 0. So let me get out of node. And let me comment out these to keep this a little cleaner. Oh. And there we go. There's my array, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I use the for loop to go through each of these. And, in the for loop, I don't just have to log these. I could, grab this value, like if array I, I could check to see if it's odd. So I can do more stuff in here. I can do like the if statement. Console.log. I can interpolate this. Even do an else statement, just, grab that value is odd. So I can do more stuff. I don't, I can do some logic inside of here for each thing. Now I just wanted to show you how to do a for loop with arrays, but there's actually a cleaner way to do this, which we're going to go into a lot more detail in later in like these videos. But let's just do a quick little example of how I can loop through an array, because it's so common to loop through an array. What I can do is what's called a for each loop. For each loop, what it allows me to do is it allows me to go through the array and go through each thing and perform a function. So I could kind of just take this if else statement here, and instead of having to do this array I can use this variable here that I declared. And we'll talk more about functions later, so you don't really have to understand this 100% because we haven't talked about functions, but I just kind of wanted to show you, this is the preferred way, to go use this for each loop instead of doing a for loop, just because it's cleaner. It does the same thing, but now we don't have to keep track of like this I variable, kind of thinking about, I have to subtract 1 or don't I? It just looks a little cleaner. But always good to know how to do a for loop on arrays, might come up in an interview or something. So that's a for loop. That's just the basic for loop. And like I said, honestly, we don't use for loops that much because what we tend to generally loop over is arrays. And when we loop over arrays, we want to use these methods given to us by JavaScript. But every now and then you do need a for loop. So it's not like it's not needed. So let's talk about the next most common kind of loop, and that's a while loop. So a while loop is, as long as this condition is true, it's going to loop over this array. So let's do the same thing of like counting to 10. So I'm going to up here declare a count variable, set that equal to 0. And now I can write my while loop. So I can say, hey, as long as count is less than or equal to 10, I can go ahead and console.log. And then I can just kind of show down here, done with loop. Now, something that you see here, I'm not ever seeing this done with loop variable. I'm going to hit Control C because what's actually going on is I'm stuck in an infinite loop. So I need to get out of this infinite loop. So in my terminal, I hit Control C. That gets me out of the loop. So why am I in an infinite loop? Well, my count is 0, and I have this condition, well, count is less than or equal to 0 log count. And that puts me in a condition which is never going to get out of there because count's always going to be less than 0. So this infinitely loops. So what I need to do is somehow change count. And I can just do that, right up here. I can just say, I can log count, and then I can do like a count plus. And let's not log the string count. Let's log the actual variable count. And there we go, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's the basic while loop. We can use that. There's some other things that we can do with a while loop. So I can do like I can break or continue, because maybe, let's just show you this, what break and continue are. Let's say I have for some reason, I don't want to log 7. So I can check to see if count equals 7. I'm going to use this continue keyword, but I still want to increment count. So what this is going to do is, if count equals 7, I'll do this one check for 7. I'm going to increment count, but I'm going to continue. And let's see what effect this has on our log. Now notice I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't log 7 because this console.log is after this continue. So I can skip out of a particular code if I don't want to run something else. There's also, and I can do what's called a break. Let's check to see if count equals 8. I'm going to use this break keyword. And this will break out of the loop. So now I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because I hit 7, and then I continue, and then I hit 8, and then I break. So maybe to make this a little more clear, let's maybe skip like 4 and break at 8. So 1, 2, 3, skip 4, do 5, 6, 7, then we hit 8, and then we log that done with loop. So yeah. Those are 2 basic kind of loops. We're going, like I said, once we get to arrays, we're going to spend a lot more time with these kind of loops where we're iterating over in an array of items. So, because that's the most common use case with looping. But just wanted to show the for and while loop before that. So yeah, but in our next video, we're going to talk about functions. So I will see you there.